Welcome to Building the Future, hosted by Kevin Horick. With millions of listeners a month, Building the Future has quickly become one of the fastest rising programs, with a focus on interviewing startups, entrepreneurs, investors, CEOs, and more. The radio and TV show airs in 15 markets across the globe, including Silicon Valley. For full showtimes, past episodes, or to sponsor the show, please visit buildingthefutureshow.com.
Welcome back to the show. Today we have Martin Gurri. He's an author, geopolitical analyst, and former CIA. Martin, welcome to the show.
Hey, happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on the show. I think what you're doing and getting your thoughts on a bunch of things right now is very much relevant to what we're facing. But maybe before we get into all that, let's get to know you a little bit better and start off with where you grew up.
Well, actually, I was born in Cuba.
Oh, interesting.
So I came here as a kid, and otherwise, I'm pretty much a creature of the swamp. I mean, I live in Northern Virginia,
Okay.
which is where many of us swamp denizens tend to gather. And I worked my entire career in government, as you say, as a CIA analyst. So I'm a Washington D.C. guy, but really Northern Virginia. My wife I met here in the high school, and
Very cool.
pretty much has been. I'm a local boy. I've traveled a lot, but usually come back here.
Very cool. So you went to university. What did you take and why?
Right. Oh, that's a really good question in more ways than one. You're probably gonna ask me to stop talking in a minute.
No, it'll be good. I'm interested.
In my answer, I was a history guy.
Okay.
I was history. I went to George Mason University, right here.
Okay.
And I was a history major and I got my master's in history there as well.
What got you passionate about history?
Well, I mean, I did a big long post recently on the importance of understanding history.
Okay.
At any time, if you want to achieve anything in a society, and the sense that today there is sort of a war against memory, that we're trying to eradicate our memory of history. History seems to be looked on as kind of like the mother of injustice.
Interesting.
All the bad things seem to come from there. We all know that there were all these racists and all these bigots and these fascists and slave owners and all kinds of terrible people who really did exist back then. But that is used as a pretext for basically thinking we just have to transcend history. We have to repudiate history. Understanding it makes no sense. It's almost immoral. I think, and I hope I give some examples in my post, that you lose what Hannah Arendt, the philosopher, said, the dimension of depth in human experience when you have no history. You become kind of like, a person without a memory is like a shadow on a screen, and a country without a history is sort of like a shallow puddle that any wind can evaporate. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So if you want to, if there are forces that you find are unjust or abusive or not conforming to some ideal that you have, you cannot just get there by basically lobotomizing yourself. You can only get there by understanding how we got here and how we could get out of it. And I find like this is, you'll hear me talk a lot about a crisis of authority as being probably the central political issue of our moment.
Okay.
And I think in part, the crisis of authority is a loss of historical memory, and the recovery of memory and the restoration of authority are probably the same project.
Okay. Interesting. But maybe before we dive into that a little bit deeper, I did cut you off there and you were talking about your university career. So do you want to maybe finish that and then talk about your career with some career highlights along the way up until what you're doing now, and then we'll dive into all that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really that exciting a person. I thought my university career was normal. I kissed butt with a lot of professors and got my grades and learned something along the way. My career in CIA was an interesting one. I mean, I always describe myself as having had probably the least glamorous job in CIA.
Okay. Why
Whenever
do you
I
say
talk,
that?
well, people think of CIA as license to kill and spy versus spy. I was an analyst of global events, okay, of global, I'm sorry,
Okay.
of global media. So my particular shop, my corner of CIA, the media of the world funneled into this place, and then there was a lot of translation that went on for those of us who couldn't read every language in the world.
Right.
Interestingly, that job when I started out was very, very fascinating, but straightforward. If you, for example, if the president wanted to find out what how my policies playing in France, well, there was first of all very limited amount of open information, and every country had some equivalent of the New York Times, a source that said the news agenda, right? So
Okay.
it led the parade, and everybody kind of followed suit. So if you wanted France, you went to one newspaper, Le Monde, and that's all you had to do. You had this limited source of information, and it was very structured in a very hierarchical way.
Right.
Then something happened, and this is directly the cause of the book.
Right.
Um, Around the turn of the new millennium,
Yep.
what I've called a digital earthquake, uh,
Okay.
I guess epicenter somewhere near Palo Alto, I would guess, uh,
Sure.
um, just unleashed a tsunami of information in volumes that were unprecedented in human experience. And that's not just a phrase. Measured in data bits, the year 2001 doubled the volume of information produced in the entire history of the human race, going back to the cave paintings, okay?
Interesting.
The year 2002 doubled 2001. That
Wow.
trend had more or less been maintained. And if you chart it and if you read the book, that chart is there. If you chart it, it looks like a gigantic wave, literally a tsunami.
Interesting. Before we keep going, what's the title of the book, and what made you actually decide to write a book?
Right. Title is The Revolt of the Public, and the subtitle is The Crisis of Authority in the New Millennium.
Okay.
And what made me want to write that book was when I was back in CIA, we watched, several of us, it wasn't just me, watched this tsunami sweep over the world. And right behind that, we saw increasing levels of social and political turbulence. We heard, I guess you would call them angry voices, mocking voices in places. And one example would be, for example, Egypt, um, where all there had been before was silence. And that, as I look back on it now, was the very first early warning signal of this public, the revolt of the public, of this
Okay.
public that has since then, of course, knocked down dictators and smashed up old traditional political parties, and of course elected some outlandish populists to office.
Right.
Uh, and so I left government and I kept, but I was lucky in my career that this was something that I did because I was very fascinated with it, not just because they gave me a paycheck every couple of weeks.
Sure.
And so I kept doing what I was doing, and I had the freedom to basically ask my own questions versus the ones that the government was interested in. And
Interesting.
and then it became very clear around the year 2001, because one argument that was made when I was still in government and even a little afterwards was, yeah, okay, so you have all these people who are speaking and look and sound very discontented and very even enraged against the established order. But I mean, it's virtual. They're all online. They're all on their laptops. So they're facing policemen and they're facing the military. So what are they going to do? Hit them with their laptops? So there's this joke going on that, yes, oh, this is very interesting, but it has no real effect on the world beyond virtual digital world. So
Interesting.
the year 2001, of course, saw the misnamed Arab Spring. Many, many, many countries, in each one of them, each instance, from Tunisia to Egypt to Yemen to Syria to Libya and so on, each one of them, the digital information sphere was implicated in some cases very deeply in these revolts. But then the same year, 2001, you saw the indignados. So things moved to the democratic world. You saw the indignados in Spain, who crushed in the end the socialist government that had been standing. You saw a similar sort of uprising in Israel. You saw the occupiers in the US. And even if you want to push it a little bit, the London riots of 2001, which used a signaling system, that basically allowed the looters to stay ahead of the authorities in much the same way that all these other less criminal and more political insurgencies had done. So 2011 kind of convinced me that this was the phase change year, right? The phase change is what happens to water.
Sure.
At a certain moment, it's just water interacting with temperatures, and suddenly it's ice, right?
Sure.
Well, the phase change of 2011 was you had people angry, burbling up on the digital universe, and suddenly they were on the streets. Okay, now suddenly and governments were falling. Okay, so that persuaded me that there was more to it than just people basically moaning online about their government. And I did a lot of research on that, and the result is the book, which has an interesting history. If you want to get into that a little bit.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I e-published because I felt like I didn't want to deal with editors or anything like that. So I e-published, and it came out in 2014.
Okay.
And had a pretty nice reception. And then 2015 and 2016 came, and Donald Trump, among other things, but Brexit also, made lots of people basically say, "Oh, look," and I get accused a lot of having predicted Donald Trump. Well, I don't know if you've read the book or not, but basically,
I've skimmed through it. I haven't read the whole thing.
Well, in more than one place, I say that I don't believe in prophecy, right? I don't believe that you can't predict. I mean, and I come from CIA, and that was their business model, was prophecy. They talk to the president and say, "This is what's going to happen, Mr. President." And as long as tomorrow looks like yesterday, which is a lot of the time, to be fair,
sure,
they're good. The second that there is a discontinuity, which is, of course, what the president wants, another Pearl Harbor or 9/11 or something like that, yeah, they get it wrong. They get that wrong. It's just, it can't be done. It's not a question of too much or too little information. It is, for reasons that we won't get into here, I think in principle impossible to do. So I did not predict Donald Trump, is what I'm getting at, but I laid out the forces and the structural momentum that made a person like Trump and a vote like Brexit possible. So that was basically, I'm a Trump profiteer. The book really took off after Trump was elected. And at a certain moment, I got a call from an unknown person to me called Patrick Collison.
Okay.
Saying he wanted to publish my book. I looked up Patrick Collison. He is the CEO of Stripe.
Right. Yep.
At the time he was 29. I think he's 30 now. He is a very, very well-to-do person. He's basically a San Francisco-based guy.
Sure.
And
he's a billionaire now, for people who don't know.
That's very much of a billionaire, yes.
He's been extremely successful, and their product is actually really great. I use it all the time, and I actually have a buddy that works there, so I know them very well.
I have met him. He is
very cool.
He is certifiably, I mean, if you look at his life history, he's certifiably a genius. Yeah. But he comes across as, some people are geniuses and you talk to them and you can't figure out what's going on inside their heads. With him, it's not like that. He talks and he's worth remembering what he says. Right? He's a very exceedingly effective and articulate man, even if half my age, by the way. But okay, we'll forgive him that. So he was starting a new press, Stripe Press.
Yeah.
Which he wanted me to be one of the very first. I think I'm the fourth book that they have published.
Very cool.
If you ever see the book, and I hope you have the physical book in your hands and not the, but either way, it's beautifully designed. It has that sort of San Francisco, Silicon Valley sense of
Sure.
design to it. My ebook had a lot. It comes with a lot of illustrations, a lot of charts, and somehow they have managed to turn all of that into a work of art. Just to look at it is beautiful.
Yeah, I
So
just
that,
have the digital copy, but the layout is really nice actually, and the
yeah,
charts and stuff are
yeah.
well done. They are for sure, and they're
So
simple to like understand. That's the
right,
one thing I noticed about because sometimes it's like, what am I looking at here? But in
right.
your case, I think they were all very easy to understand.
Well, I one of the few things that I can claim to be an expert in, this is not false modesty, is visual persuasion. I was very lucky when I was still inside the government to be able to research that to death and actually
Right.
design methodologies that could decode visual persuasion. So I always feel like text alone is a big bore if you don't give the
Interesting.
eye if you don't give the eye something to kind of get the image of the text,
Sure.
uh, you're changing your readers, I think. So the book was written with that in mind as well. Now that the new book came out in 2018, it does have a long essay, about a fifth of the book now, at the end, in which I look at the world after the publication of the ebook with
Sure.
Trump and Brexit, but in particular, I deal with the crisis of authority in I guess issues like fake news and the idea that we're living in a post-truth world, and how that relates to the original thesis of the crisis of authority. And it's
Sure.
done pretty well. The book is done pretty well.
No, that's awesome, man. Congrats on your success with that. I'm curious though. There's a quote that you guys sent me that really resonated with me since I first got introduced to you, and the quote was, "Technology has categorically reversed the information balance of power between the public and the elites who manage the great hierarchical institutions of the information age, like governments, political parties, and the media." The thing that's interesting to me about that was, and why I love the internet so much, is it's literally removed all the borders. You have a global marketplace to build a company and get clients from. You can hire people across the globe. And to your point, you literally have access to the same amount of information and you can learn basically anything online for free or very inexpensive. Do
And,
you agree with that, or what's your thoughts around that?
totally agree with that. And if you want to dwell, because the book deals with some of the negative sides
Sure, there's
of the,
pros and cons. Yeah,
but I mean, I am a big believer in the enormous benefits of this connection. The fact that you can make human links um, in the most amazing places. I mean, I'll get somebody from the Ukraine. They just had elections there, and somebody tweets with my tweet handle on it saying, "Oh, Martin Gurri, look, you were right about the Ukraine." I'm going, and you know, it's in Cyrillic, and I have no idea. I have to use translators. I don't know. So you make these connections. Um, for some reason, France is absolutely. I mean, there are pockets of places that are really that really get the book and are very keen on it. San Francisco, Silicon Valley, those people, the technology people, absolutely get it. The French, in some weird way, get it. I think because they needed an explanation so desperately of what was going on over there.
interesting.
So I have these conversations across the world, and I mean, I'm gonna sound like what I am, which is a fairly old geezer. Um, I when I was in CIA, got posted to Paraguay,
Okay,
Asunción, Paraguay, and when I went there, there was no email yet. There,
interesting.
the Paraguayan Congress was debating this very strange thing called the internet, and the question is this a good witch or a bad witch? Is this a good thing or a bad? I mean, in Paraguay, just by its history and its location, is fairly denuded of information. Okay, if you want to do serious research in Paraguay, you're kind of in trouble. And here they had all this access to basically the entire world's knowledge set, and they were wondering whether it was a good thing or a bad thing. Well, those were the elites. The elites could get their information, right? They did the right thing, and they allowed the internet to come in, and email kicked in. And I went from a world in which it took me 6 weeks to get a letter back and forth between the time I posted a letter and I got a response from the US, 6 weeks had passed, to instantaneous. Okay, you have no idea what a change. So I saw that change in my life, my lived experience.
Yeah, no, that's actually really quite fascinating. So I'm curious though, in this information age where people literally have access to everything and they can use that information for good and bad and everywhere in between, how do you or how do people understand and actually figure out what's truthful and what's not? Because I think that's really tricky sometimes for a lot of people. And I would put myself in that, right? Like, a lot of people seem to read the side of the political spectrum that they follow and don't read the other side to at least form their own opinion all the time, right? And I think understanding where both sides are coming from can potentially make you understand the world better, but also open up your mind to get new clients and new products, and actually potentially open up new business verticals. Do you agree with that, or what are your thoughts around that?
Well, I do agree with that. I will give you my definition of analysis. I
Okay,
mean,
sure.
because that's what I have been my whole life, and I thought really hard because you get given all these ideals, objectivity, and so forth, and you ask yourself, well, what does that mean? I don't think it means much, objectivity. I think analysis is the capacity to look at an event or an idea for as many perspectives as you can possibly fit inside a single subjective human brain. Okay, and
Okay.
perspective is massively important. I can take you to the top of the Empire State Building and show you the city that looks like the heavenly city down below, right? New York
Sure.
City, Manhattan. Or I can take you all the way down to the curb where the cars are honking and the homeless person is puking on the sidewalk, and it looks like hell, right? It is
Sure.
the same. It is the same city. It's not that reality is malleable or changeable. It's just a question of what is your perspective. So insofar as if you could do 360-degree perspective, you would have the largest amount of analytic insight into an event or an idea you can. I don't think anybody can do that. I don't think we can put ourselves into, very extreme circumstances. Probably just as well that we can't. But to the extent that you can, that is so. Now, what's happened to us in our moment is, as I relate in the book, we were given a perspective in the old days, right? It was easy for us. We
Right.
had Walter Cronkite and his kind, or the New York Times and their kind, and this is all the news that's fit to print. Here it is. This is it. This is the perspective. You don't need to think any harder. We're giving it to you. Okay. So there was a kind of a fiction that a mass audience existed, and the audience, it was like we would look into this gigantic mirror and we all looked the same. We had to somehow or another, all our differences had been planed out, and we just received this information and this perspective and we accepted it. Well, what the digital world has done is it's taken that mirror and kind of thrown it on the floor, and it's now in 1,000 pieces. And you were talking about one side or the other. In fact, I think that's vastly oversimplifying. I think there are hundreds of just political perspectives.
Sure. Okay, fair enough.
So you can be mostly on the right, and you can belong to about dozens of flavors of that.
Sure.
You can be on the left and be on dozens of flavors of that. And each one of these little war bands, I guess I would call political war bands, is struggling to be heard. And I think more than what you talked about, which is living in an information bubble, I think it's almost impossible to do that. But I think the problem is the noise deafens you because everybody's shouting. Everybody's shouting. The best way to get noticed, to grab attention, is to criticize somebody in such vicious and horrific terms that that person or their side returns the favor and starts yelling at you. And then suddenly now you and they are engaged in this very loud match, and the people behind you feel like they have to line up behind. So suddenly you are a leader in your group. And that dynamic goes all the way from some fairly marginal groups, but I mean, it's what elected Donald Trump. It's what's made Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez a thing. It is the dynamic of American politics today.
Yeah, interesting. What's your thoughts around the whole fake news thing? Because it seems to me, and you can, obviously I want your thoughts on this, that everything could be labeled as fake news if you spin it in the right angle, right? Or am I missing something there?
Again, it's perspective, right? I mean,
yeah, sure.
there are some things that are falsehoods.
Sure.
Okay. And there is a phenomenon, I think is the case. The question is, are people being deluded by lies? I guess that would be the
Sure.
blunt way of stating it. Is the American electorate being fooled or bamboozled by liars in say Facebook news or something like that?
Sure.
And the answer is almost certainly not. Okay,
Sure.
almost certainly not. People, there's no question that there are certain there are lies that the internet is full of them. But anybody who consumes them almost certainly already believes what they're reading. So they're not being persuaded of anything.
Interesting.
They are just kind of reassuring themselves. It's like food for the soul. Yes, they're right. Yeah. The famous case of Hillary Clinton was going to die because she had all these illnesses during the election. Well, that was completely fake.
Sure.
But people read it, no doubt. None of them thought, oh, now I'm not going to vote for Hillary. They just thought, oh yeah, great, I'm against her anyway. So she's a sickly person, and one more reason not to be with her. So the deeper issue, honestly, so if you want to talk about the Russians, yes, the Russians did intervene. They always do. Did they have any effect? Every bit of evidence I have seen says they had zero effect. They had absolutely no. I mean, ask yourself, if you are, I don't know, if you say a devout Catholic,
okay,
and you read a fake news article in Facebook that says Catholics are horrible people who commit all these horrible crimes, but Islam is wonderful, would you now go, oh yeah, I guess I'm going to give up my religion and become a Muslim? Nobody does that. Nobody gets persuaded out of their deeply held moral and political beliefs because they've read a story in Facebook, and that is the case whether the story is true or fake. In that particular instance, it makes no difference. So I don't think the Russians persuaded anybody or anything of anything. I think the deeper issue is the crisis of authority. Okay. The crisis of authority cannot help but trigger a crisis of uncertainty. I mean, look, reality is what it is that Empire State Building in New York City. That doesn't change. But the job of mediating between faraway reality and the public, of giving, I guess, the flux of events meaning, that has always been the highest calling of the elites. And we should talk about the elites at some point. They were the authorities. So, for example, Pearl Harbor was a day of infamy. It wasn't the day that the U.S. Navy in the Pacific got caught with its pants down. All right. So events have to be mediated and explained. And those who do the explaining used to have the public's trust. When you look at, for example, trust in government at the time of JFK, it was always hovering between 70 and 80%, and it had been that way for quite a while. You look at it today, it's like between 20 and 30%. Okay, the trust has been destroyed beyond recovery. The mediator class that conveys information, that used to have authority and information, journalists, politicians, academics, it's gone with the wind. So in a weird way, reality is up for grabs. And as I said, the issue goes a lot deeper than Russia's on Facebook. A nation of 320 million, we need shared sources of meaning and shared interpretations of reality. I mean, we need to be able to argue as a democracy from a common set of facts. But those who used to settle factual disputes have lost all credibility, and they are perceived as fakers themselves. So what's happened? Um, the truth, in a weird way, has started to unbundle. Um, this sorts of that tends to happen, as you know, in the digital universe. Everything unbundles and personalizes. So newspapers used to have a great big bundle of information. They have unbundled into individual stories. The old music albums that I used to enjoy in my youth
Sure.
have now become personalized playlists. So now we have information playlists that people consume and highly personalized ideas about what the truth is.
No, you're right, and I'm curious to get your thoughts. YouTube got a bunch of slack in the last couple of years for what other people claim their videos were deleted that were talking about certain things that YouTube said violated their terms of service. And it doesn't really matter what my opinion is, but my thought around it is, if you publish something on somebody else's platform, for better or worse, they obviously will police it no matter what your opinion is. And a company like YouTube probably has more open-minded people than maybe some other platforms policing this. But at the same time, if they think that what you're posting to their site is maybe not as open-minded, they might delete your content. And I'm not saying that's good or bad. That's just kind of the reality of how I see that. What are your thoughts around services like YouTube policing content? Because in a lot of cases, they're wiping out people's livelihood, or at least part of their livelihood.
Yeah, my thoughts are it's going to happen, right? I mean, you
Sure.
cannot get around that. I don't know YouTube as well as I do Facebook,
Okay, well,
but
same
I can
thing
tell
though,
you,
right?
right, exactly that. I can tell you Facebook spends billions
Sure.
and thousands of people in what I think they call safety and security, which is, I mean, for example, young kids were committing suicide
Yeah.
on Facebook Live. Yeah. So that is not something you want to happen.
Yeah.
Um, so interestingly, what happens when you take measures is people get ticked off. In that particular instance, Facebook came up with these incredibly elaborate and I think clever um, algorithms to get a sense of when something that horrible was about to happen, just for the postings online, that there was a possibility that this person might be committing suicide, and created this network where responders were immediately alerted. Okay.
Right.
What happened was not, oh, thank you, Facebook, for preventing suicide, but what the hell are you doing trampling on our privacy? See? So
Yeah. Interesting.
it's these enormous platforms have to police themselves.
Right.
If I were to have a complaint, is that it's very opaque how they do that. Okay.
Okay. What do you mean by that?
I mean, they don't put out a set of very clear rules and regulations that they say, well, because sometimes people get taken down, and the
Right.
question is, what is it? Where does it read that that person violated anything that you have said previously would not be allowed on your platform? And the answer is, well, we just made this up, right? I mean, a lot of times,
Yeah.
because it is. Look, these are people mostly, if you want the human aspect of it, who run these platforms. These are people who are in their own way very idealistic in a sort of hippy dippy way, and would love to have as open a platform as possible in that sense. I don't think they're into it to control the conversation.
Sure.
But then they get these gigantic. Well, first of all, the questions of legality. If people make death threats and things like that, well, that has to be addressed.
Sure.
Suicide again, and then they get all this public opinion, mostly from the elites, saying, well, why are you allowing these opinions to be broadcast in your platform? And they have to make a call as to what extent are these people are just unhappy because perfectly legitimate opinions that never used to be heard before are now being heard,
Sure.
and to what extent are these opinions actually in some way, either criminal or offensive in an egregious way. And nobody's ever going to be happy where they draw the line.
Sure. Do you think though people get too offended by things nowadays, or have we always just been like that? It's just been brought more to the forefront with the internet.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I I I tend to think that there is a generational aspect there.
Okay.
Um, I don't ever recall people. Okay, I'm a baby boomer,
Sure.
and we had, believe me, we had our dysfunctions more than our share.
Sure.
But that particular one of feeling vulnerable, feeling triggered, feeling offended, that was not one of them. I think that's a developed art. I think there are tremendously delicate individuals out there who, as a way of promoting the ideals they believe in, have antennas that reach out into the slightest little variation or deviation from those ideals, and then proclaim themselves to be offended, and then demand that violation of their ideals be somehow squelched. That's my take on that. And I think, honestly, the millennials have taken this to some kind of extreme that sometimes it's even hard for me to understand. I mean, young people tend to be pretty hardy. Us older people, if we feel threatened, you can see why. But yeah, I mean, you guys, you're very robust. You can bounce back. Nobody need be. You don't need safe spaces. You can deal with the world as it is, I think.
Interesting. I think the other thing too that I want your thoughts around is it seems to me that the the more you can handle for better or worse and let it roll off you and kind of just let go, whether the person's right or wrong, you can't let some of that stuff affect you and ruin where you're trying to go in life, right? If you get so hung up with trying to fix other people's opinions, sometimes I feel like you end up wrecking your own career path or where you're trying to go. Do you agree with that, or have you found that? Or maybe people just need to stop caring so much what other people think of them or what they're trying to do and actually just figure out where they need to go in life and stop worrying about other people. Like, have you found that, or what are your thoughts around that?
Well, remember what I said about being an analyst.
Sure.
I think, honestly, the no, our environment is so fast changing. Yeah, so I get asked a lot.
Sure.
So
I can imagine.
what should we do? What should we do? What should we do? And I say, okay, let's figure out where we are before we figure out what to do, because the environment is so fast changing that the place you're at may not be where you think you are. Okay,
Sure.
and I think if somebody disagrees with you very vehemently, the
Yep.
first question you ought to ask is, what makes that person think something that seems so strange to me? What is it? Don't assume that is a bad person or a stupid person. That sometimes is the normal assumption.
Right.
Assume that they are just as smart as you are, and just as well read and educated as you are, and just as well meaning as you are. So how can you get to that very strange position being all those things? And if you understand that, I think once you understand that, you can deal with that person in a much more persuasive way from your own ideals than just by yelling back. You yell back, and honestly, all you have is a shouting match.
Right.
If you understand why that person came to believe what they believed, and you respect that path, you can then attempt to persuade them to a new path because you know where that path has been. Otherwise, it's just, they're stupid, or they are bad people, or they're being misled by somebody, and well, if somebody tells you that as an argument, you're stupid, you're bad, you are being bamboozled by people. You're gonna change your mind. You just gotta get angry. That's
Yeah.
all you're gonna do.
It's
Yeah.
how you handle it, right?
Well, it's wisdom is understanding the people that disagree with you and the people that you.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think, and that's always been the case. The internet makes that very difficult because the people that get, like I said, the most attention tend to be the ones that are the most vehement and loud and
Sure.
frankly obnoxious, because they get attention. But if you understand why they're doing that, and there's a perfectly logical and reasonable explanation why they do it, then you kind of see what the game is.
Sure. No, that's interesting. Yeah. No, I'm actually. It seems to be the people that are the most successful are the ones that are willing to hear and understand where others are coming from, but also push themselves out of their own comfort zone while doing that. And then those are the people that truly change the world, right? Are the ones that just kind of accept those things and try to figure things out and understand and constantly learn. And I think the older you get, the more and more you realize you really have no idea what's actually going on, or how little you actually know. At least that's what I think. I've kind of noticed. I'm 36, just so you have some context, right? It's like the older I get, I'm like, wow, I know so little about most things, right?
Well, you've just described my life. I mean, when I was a young man, I knew everything.
Sure.
Okay. And right now, I know almost nothing. And I
Yeah,
wake up every morning and look at events, and I'm supposed to be an expert. And I go, this is the most incredibly crazy and confusing era and circumstance that I have ever lived through. The young me would have said, "Oh, I get it. I'm smart," and I would have chosen some path or some side or something. The old me just stands back and wants to understand as much as possible. And and
sure.
I and I think, um, I mean, honestly, there's the digital environment pressures you to take sides.
Interesting.
They're always kind of herding you in a certain direction. And I think we part of I think us. I mean, the digital environment is very new. It's a gigantic transformation. I call it the fifth wave of information.
Interesting.
Um, it is the equivalent of the when the printing press was invented. So we're just at the tippy end beginning of this era. Okay, and I think part of growing into it is going to be learning individually, not to be herded into camps and positions that we frankly don't feel that powerfully about, but even if when we agree with them, and that being put in there prevents us from them understanding what are all the other opposing voices. How did they get there, right? All you're being asked to do is just join your camp and shout back, and that seems to be almost like the law of gravity of the web. Um,
Interesting.
and I think we should fight the law of gravity.
Yeah, okay. What else do you see, or where do you see the future of all this stuff going? Or do you have any predictions?
I have no predictions. Remember what I said.
Okay, interesting.
I complete disbeliever in prophecy, but I know what is hanging out there to be decided by us.
Okay,
And the reason I don't make predictions is because we all make choices. And when you have 330 million people making choices, it gets awfully complicated. And if you think you can predict that, good luck.
sure.
Um, but we have choices.
Okay,
I think we have an elite class. I mean, essentially, my take on our moment is there are these institutions that were shaped in the industrial age. They're very slow moving. They're very hierarchical. They're uh, they're filled and staffed by people who have gone through a lengthy process of accreditation, and that industrial world is now being swept away by the information tsunami. It's just being battered. So the authority that these institutions had, starting with government, but the media as well, it's just bleeding away. The question is, how do we restore authority? There is no way you can live in a world as fractured as ours is today in any kind of permanent sense. So I think in some ways authority has to be restored, and the question is, and it's going to be restored around an elite class. You cannot have a enormous country like ours and pretend like it's going to be, Athenian democracy where we'll vote on everything. It's not going to happen. You need somebody in charge of institutions. The institutions need to be flatter, but they're going to be there. So the question is, what about the elites? And that is, I mean, to all your listeners, I would say, think about the people that you vote for. Think about the people that you give money for politically, but also think about the people that are in the TV shows that you watch, and the movies that you watch, and the books that you read. These are the elites that you are selecting, okay? And my take, honestly, is that the current elite, and I'm not a revolutionary by any means.
Sure.
But my take, and I thought about it really hard, and as I was thinking it really hard, the Harvey Weinstein scandal broke, and this enormous Me Too thing happened where our elite class was ravaged because of these incredibly bizarre perks that these men in power and positions of authority were appropriating for themselves. And I just came to the decision, we need to select a whole new elite class with very different values, values that are attuned to the digital age, not to the industrial age. The idea of some guy standing in a tower and the top floor of a tower in a suite making decisions, that has got to change, I think. We need people who understand that now they can be criticized by the public. Now that they are, in a sense, the public is sitting in that office suite right next to them, because that's what the digital world does. So nothing you do is secret anymore. Nothing you do is granted to you by your place in the hierarchy. You have to earn it every day. And I think if you ask me about the future, I would hope, I'm not going to predict, but I would hope it would bring a new elite class that is more attuned to this new environment, that is more honest, that is more courageous, and has more integrity than the people we have in the elite class today.
Interesting. But what are your thoughts around, because it seems to be as more and more people become entrepreneurial, they're taking their own future into their own hands, and it seems to me anyway that more and more people almost don't care about the who's in power, because they just don't trust any of them, and so they're putting their own future in their own hands because of the global marketplace that we talked about earlier, right? That if you create a business online that sells globally, sure, if one country has a recession or is going through some hard times, you just pivot your business and go after business in another country, and then once that other country recovers, maybe you go back there, or maybe you figure out how to make money through a recession, or other things. What is your thoughts around that kind of mindset?
Yeah, that I think that is a very powerful and very liberating development. When I was in San Francisco, I talked to one guy who, I believe it was sandals. I want to say sandals. He just made sandals.
Okay.
He manufactured, but he sold them online to the world.
Sure.
So he had this very niche market. And I mean, listening to him, I thought, well, this is incredible. I mean, this is the kind of thing that could not possibly have happened at any number of levels when I was a young man.
Sure.
However, if you care about democracy, and remember, I was born in Cuba.
Right.
By the time I was 10 years old, I had lived in a dictatorship of the right and a dictatorship of the left. So
Okay.
I know what not democracy looks like and sounds like. So if you care about democracy, that's national, and you're not gonna want Canadians to vote in American elections, and nor do they want us to vote in theirs. So you have to work out, how can we create a discussion space and an information space that has enough authority to it that we can agree it's legitimate. What's happening now is whoever gets elected, the other side says you're illegitimate. We don't buy it. We don't think you really are the president. So, it happened to Obama in a sense with the Tea Party, and it happened to Trump practically the day he got elected. So, we can't continue like that and expect democracy to function as it is intended.
Yeah. No, it's interesting, right? Because yeah, it's quite fascinating just how people see that, right? Um and how Well, I think I love the fact that people have been taking their own kind of destiny in their own hands, and I think that inspires others to do the same thing. But I do agree with you that you do need some sort of authority around everything, or there's just chaos. But how that comes to be, I think it needs to change, and I think a lot of people think it needs to change, and it's really easy for me to say that because I don't really have any good ways of making that change happen other than getting more and more people out to build technology to actually make change, right? And I think that's one thing that a lot of people have the ability to do now, because it can literally cost hundreds of dollars to get a company up and going, and you start building technology to change some of this stuff that you're not happy with. And I love to see what people end up building, right, in the coming years.
Yeah, and honestly, and I think it's going to be in part a generational change.
Sure.
A lot of these despicable elites that I finally decided really did not deserve to be where they were also baby boomers. And just Father Time will have his way with them. But yeah, I mean, I tend to agree that there is this opportunity for people to both express and commercialize on an individual basis in a way that was not possible before. You do have, though, a lot of choice. You are also but not just your podcast, which is a big megaphone for you, but you personally have. You vote, you give attention to certain people. To the extent that we give attention to people who are, for example, liars, well, then people are going to lie because they're getting attention. I mean, what my feeling is, the industrial age produced politicians that gave us solutions, right? That's what the word that you said. How do you solve the problem of inequality, solve the problem of joblessness? Well, that's assuming that these immensely complicated political, economic, and social relationships are like a mathematical equation that can be solved. Okay, and of course they can't be solved. So we demand of our elites that they give us these vast solutions, and then we basically devour them and tear them to bits when they can't after we've elected them or whatever. So I tell you what, if I ever hear a politician say, I'm not sure, or if he says, I tried that thing and it didn't work, we're going to try the next thing now. The way, for example, an entrepreneur would, right? If you tried an approach and it didn't get you go for the next. I mean, how many people have failed again and again before they hit the actual product?
Everyone, basically.
Pretty much everyone, basically. And that's actually, when you look at a human life, that's how it works.
Sure.
So why we expect our politicians to be never wrong? And so it's us that demand of them. And they have, of course, their background as industrial elites lead them to think that that's the way they need to talk. And so the first politician that says, I'm not sure, I'm going to vote for that person. Okay, I'm going to vote for that person.
But Martin, we're kind of coming to the end of the show, so let's close with mentioning where people can get the book, get more information about all the stuff you've written about online, and any other links you want to mention.
Yeah. Okay. So the book is on Amazon, and it's, like I said before, in a very beautiful hardcover version, but also in Kindle and also on audiobooks. And I also have a blog called The Fifth Wave. So if you just kind of Google Fifth Wave and Gurri, you got me pretty much. And I post basically the blog is kind of like my ongoing research and ongoing thought process, so that the ideas of the book are reflected there, and actually got some of the posts made it into the book in very changed ways, because the ideas that I had developed in the blog led to the book in some sense.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be on the show, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you, and have a good rest of your day, man.
Yeah. Hey, Kevin, it's been great.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. Please visit our website at buildingthefutureshow.com to join the free community, sign up for our newsletter, or to sponsor the show. The music is done by Electric Mantra. You can check him out at electricmantra.com and keep building the future.